In this module, we'll discuss publishing via simple file networking. As I've mentioned earlier, we're able to publish to BrightSign players using a variety of different methods. This could include publishing to a memory card, publishing directly over a local area network, publishing via a web server, we call this simple file networking, or publishing via the BrightSign network. In this module, I'm going to talk about publishing via simple file networking. Before I do so, I need to remind you of a few things which have been covered earlier in setup modules back in the setup training, and I suggest you review those if this doesn't make sense to you. That when publishing via simple file networking, you don't actually have a direct connection to your player. BrightAuthor is publishing to a folder on a web server, and the player has been configured to monitor the contents of that folder. This is handy because you can publish to a large number of players, but you need to be able to get your files from BrightAuthor to that web server. You'll need to work with your IT folks on that particular problem. You might be able to mount the folder as a local volume, in which case that folder would appear on your machine as if it were a drive. But that's often not possible. It's not possible in my case. And so I need to use additional software and take an additional step to copy the contents of my publish to my web server. FTP, short for File Transfer Protocol, is normally the method used to do this, and that's the method I'll use here in the training today, which involves having an FTP program and knowing how to access the web server via FTP, which involves knowing the location of the server and having a username and password. Again, these are matters you'll need to undertake with your IT folks, or if you have sufficient expertise yourself to get FTP going to your web server. There is no direct connection between BrightAuthor and the BrightSign players. This web folder is the go-between. But it's a convenient method when your player is somewhere in the world and you need to be able to publish to it, and it's not with you on your own land. It could be in China, it could be in Alaska, it could be in France. Who knows where that player is? But if the player's able to make contact to that web server, and if you can push files to that web server folder, then this method is going to work. There's no player feedback to BrightAuthor. It's a one-way connection. So you will not know from inside BrightAuthor that the player has received the project. You'll have to trust that it has, or someone at the far end will have to tell you if there's a problem. Here we are at my desktop. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a folder here on my desktop that I'm going to name Publish. I'm doing this because I want to publish to this folder, and then I will later move the contents of that folder up to my web server via FTP. But I need some place for it here. The folder name can be anything, but I'm using the word publish just to keep straight in my own small brain what I'm doing. I will now start BrightAuthor, and I will load the schedule that I wish to publish. And if loading schedules is new to you or doesn't make sense, go review the module on calendar basics that's earlier in this section. Here's the schedule that I wish to publish via simple file networking. The simple file networking publishing method will not appear until you've told BrightAuthor in your user application preferences that that's a method you intend to use. So enable simple file networking, and the simple file networking option will appear. I choose simple file networking, and I need to take a quick look at parameters. I need to put here the URL of the folder to my web server. This is a folder I've used before. It's the same folder I used in the setup modules earlier, and you can check that that folder is working by taking that URL and doing a copy, opening a browser, and pasting that URL to see what's there. And you should see, in my case I do, the contents of an earlier publish. And in fact, clicking on the current sync will open the XML from that prior publish. So this allows me to know, just by simply pasting that URL and hitting return, that that folder is alive and well. The web server is up and running, and it should be available to publish to. So in my parameters, I've set that URL and I say OK. I then browse to my local folder here, publish on my desktop, which is where I'm going to locally publish first so that I can then move the contents of that publish up to my web server. I choose publish. BrightAuthor moves this schedule and all its assets up to the publish folder. I'm done with BrightAuthor and I'm going to close it. I'm going to take a quick look at my folder and see that the stuff is there. And now I'm going to launch a file FTP tool. I use FileZilla. There are many on the market. FileZilla is free and open source. You can get it by looking for FileZilla through Google or your favorite search engine. I've installed FileZilla and I've configured it to connect to my own personal server directly. So I don't have to bother with usernames and passwords. That's already done. And you'll see here the publish folder that we looked at earlier when I was browsing via my web server. I'm going to take the contents of the publish folder on my desktop and move those into the publish folder on my server. So here I'm going to select these files and drop them in the publish folder up on my server. Now FileZilla, every FTP program is going to do this a little different. FileZilla is warning me that there are some files already there and I want to overwrite them all. It's very important that you overwrite pre-existing files so that your player doesn't get confused. So I'm going to overwrite every time there's a conflict. FileZilla will proceed to upload the files. Some of these will take longer than others because some are larger files than others. So we'll stand by while these files are all written. I didn't feel like making you wait, so I fast forwarded to where the upload was almost complete. And now the upload is done. The contents of this publish folder have been copied up to a folder called publish on my server. That's all I need to do, because if you remember from the setup training, the player is already checking that folder. The next time the player checks that folder, the player will note that new files have arrived and the project will begin to download to the player. Unfortunately, there's nothing in BrightAuthor I can check to see the status of that download. There's no manage tab associated with simple file networking that will allow me to see how that's progressing. But it's a very reliable model and it works very, very well where you have a stable internet connection and a stable web server. You can manage hundreds of players using simple file networking at little or no cost.